Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm the legal and government correspondent Jamie Johnson, and I'm an attorney with the Lohman Abdo Law Firm here in Hudson. And I mentioned my day job because today we're interviewing district attorney candidates here in St. Croix County. And today, for this segment, my guest is Republican candidate Rory O'Sullivan. Rory, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jamie.
So, as I do with all candidates for all offices, allow you to talk a little bit about your personal background and family, and then we'll get into job experience and qualifications and so forth. So just tell us a little bit about Rory O'Sullivan. Where do you come from, and your family and so forth?
Yeah, well, I was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1984, and I lived there for pretty much my whole life. I went to university in Dublin. And while I was studying abroad in Bologna, Italy, I met a girl from Spring Valley. And she was studying in Madison. She went to Bologna for her study abroad, and that's where we met.
So you were actually in college when you met?
Yeah, we were both in university at that time. And we married in 2008. We moved to Ireland, and we lived in Ireland until 2011 was when we moved back to Hudson. But I think we made the decision, it was that December of 2010, January 2011. And it's a little bit of a process to move back. So we primarily did it because, we wanted to start a family. And in doing so, my wife very much wanted to be near her own family. And obviously an ocean away in Ireland.
Right.
Substantially closer. Her family are still in Baldwin now, but Hudson was.
Plus, if she had the children here in the United States, then they're American citizens.
Yeah, I did. They're American citizens anyway, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're born to an American citizen living abroad,
okay.
You yourself are also eligible for American citizenship.
All
So
right.
my kids are Irish.
Well,
citizens
it would eliminate
as
any discussion like about Ted Cruz.
well. I suppose it would. Yeah.
Okay.
We moved back here, and then I sat the bar I had to resit it in 2012.
Which means you had to retake the bar.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And my wife was working with she's an accountant, and she was working with an accountancy firm in the cities. Well, in Ireland originally called PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Okay.
But then they transferred her. They're international, so they transferred her from their Dublin office to their Minneapolis office, and that's why Hudson made sense for us, because it was kind of part way, because I have a practice in Spring Valley, and that's what I started doing after taking and passing the bar.
So you come back, when I say come back, you had been in the United States before 2011?
Yeah, I mean, on and off. I did no significant period of times. I would spend 4 months at a stretch during the summers here and there. I spent a substantial amount of my time off during my time in university. Like whenever I had a break, I'd come over, and she'd come to visit me.
Okay.
But I wasn't living here at that time.
So then you set up a law office in Spring Valley, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, in 2012.
In 2012, and then started having children when?
My son was born in 2013.
Okay.
In July, so I mean, whatever that is, sometime in the fall of 2012.
All right.
And then I have a daughter as well. She was born in 2015.
Okay. So 2 young children now, and then also in 2013, you were hired as a prosecutor for Pierce County, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I spent a substantial amount of my time in Pierce County anyway. I was doing some defense work, and the position became open. The then recently district attorney in Pierce County, my boss, Sean Freilich, offered me the position thinking, it'd be a good fit, which made sense because I was spending so much of my time in the Ellsworth courthouse anyway, that I was just there, but I just happened to have a secretary and a desk and all that. So I've been doing that ever since. And it was never really like my life's work to be like a prosecutor. You have these people that say, I wanted to be a prosecutor from the day I went to law school. And I started doing it, and then once I started doing it, realized the significance of the work. That's when I really became aware, you can really affect people's lives doing this job. And realizing that, it kind of made me realize, this is something that I think I developed a love for it rather than I had one to begin with,
So are you currently full-time then in the Pierce County?
No, I'm in Pierce County. 2.5 days a week.
Okay.
It's probably more than that, frankly. Like, say on a day like today, like I was in a trial this afternoon, so I was in trial all day today, and then I came here from that. But that would be like a trial starts at 8 a.m. So usually I do a half day on Thursdays, but what that actually translates to, in fact, is that whenever I have a trial, Pierce County, we tend to schedule our criminal trials on end of the week, Thursdays, Fridays.
Okay.
And I'll take those days and try cases on those days. And then Mondays, Tuesdays, I'm just doing like the usual district attorney calendar, you know.
So sometime there during your tenure with Pierce County Prosecutor's Office, you decide to sit for another exam, and that's citizenship. And apply for that.
Yeah, I did. You know, and that kind of grew out of my desire to be the district attorney more than anything else. I mean, once you're living here and you have a green card, like those things renew every 10 years, and you know there was no real necessity, like there's no burning necessity to become a citizen, other than if you want to do one of three things, and that's vote, run in an election, and serve on a jury. And I couldn't do any of those three, and it really, like, it goes back to what I was saying. Like, once I realized how important like a prosecutor is in the community, and frankly how good I am at it, I very much felt like, you know, this is something that I need to do in St. Croix County, the county I live in. So,
right.
But obviously I'm not eligible until I become a citizen. So I became a citizen so that I could run for office. You know, and you go to the citizenship ceremony, the naturalization ceremony, and they all say to you, oh, now that you're a citizen, you can do all these wonderful things like, you know, vote and write a letter to the editor or run for office. But frankly, I think...
And you had a special date for becoming a citizen.
I did, yeah. So you don't get to pick the day you become a citizen, but they sent me this notice and they were like, you're becoming a citizen on March 17th of 2016.
So they picked St. Patrick's Day.
St. Patrick's Day.
For an Irishman to become a U.S. citizen.
It's funny enough as well, actually, after that happened, my brother-in-law had a American flag flown over the U.S. state capitol, or U.S. Capitol building, like in sort of commemoration of my citizenship. And he didn't get picked the day for that to happen either. And that also happened on March 17th.
Wow.
So like while I was becoming a citizen, then they send it to you, right? They package it up and they give you a certificate and they send it to your house. It's really cool.
That's more than coincidental for all those things to happen.
Yeah.
And one of your first official actions as a U.S. citizen was then to declare that you were going to run for this office.
I mean, that was why I want, I mean, that's why I was doing it. That's what really, that's how strongly I feel about this.
All right, well, what do you think, what are the personal qualities that you have that you feel make you a good fit for being the St. Croix County District Attorney?
I think, you know, when you talk about personal qualities, like in large measure, the District Attorney sets policy for the county. It makes policy decisions more than anything else. So, you know, it's kind of an intellectual exercise, and in the personal qualities may not entirely feed into it. Now, I think in making those decisions, in deciding what to charge, what to prosecute, how to resolve cases, you're really looking for somebody that has some life experience, somebody that has some sense of proportion, somebody that really understands like what human nature is, you know. I think I have that. In fact, I know I do. I'm eminently fair, but really what motivates me is like, I just want to do justice. I want to do the right thing. And that's the great thing about being the prosecutor, you know. As long as you're comfortable with the job that you've done, that's really the only thing that you have to account to. Just be able to look yourself in the mirror in the mornings and account to your creator at the end of your days. And that's it. And, you know, that sense of balance, of life experience, of understanding human nature is ultimately what you're looking for in a prosecutor.
And, you know, your experience in Pierce County, you know, gives you that sense of fairness, if you will, and that ability to enforce the laws.
I hope my sense of fairness predated my time as a prosecutor, right? Like, I think I was a pretty decent guy before I became a prosecutor.
Okay.
I just think being a prosecutor is kind of like applied decency, you know?
Yeah. But what about that decision? I mean, it's one thing to, you know, question the witnesses, put forward your proof to get a conviction, but what about the decision to charge in the first place? Do you get much ability to do that as the assistant DA in Pierce, or do you think you're probably more likely to be doing more of that as the St. Croix County?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how they do things in other counties. In our county, we divide our files 3 ways, and then you're given what we call a referral. You're like, here's a file, here's the police reports, here's the victim statements. Make a decision about whether or not to charge. You make that decision, you charge it, it's your file, you own it, you go to trial if you need to, you resolve it if you want to, and that's, so I mean, yeah, I mean, every case I have, I charged. Like that's the decision-making process in Pierce at least. I think that's fairly typical for most counties.
Okay, and what's your standard for charging a case, whether to bring a charge? Is it just probable cause? I mean, if the officer has enough evidence to make an arrest, then you charge the case, and then just let the jury decide, or do you filter it and say, we're not going to bring the charge unless there's an 80% chance we get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt, or a 90% chance? What do you have a standard in that regard?
So you asked like about 20 questions there, because if you're saying an 80% chance, I'm like, there is no metric for probability of conviction, right? I mean, unless you're trying speeding tickets, you could take every speeding ticket to trial, you have a 100% conviction rate, but that's not, the reason you go to trial is because in some sense, you don't know what the result is because the jury is going to make that decision, Similarly, though, you're like, do you filter? I'm like, absolutely. Everybody does. I mean, Jamie, like, there's so many things that, I mean, adultery is still on the statute books as a crime in Wisconsin. Now, it's never prosecuted because if anyone ever brought it to the district attorney's office, which they never do, that'd be the first thing you'd filter out. Like, nationwide, about 2% of cases go to trial, okay? Mm-hmm. And that's cases that are charged. And that's typical. I'm sure that's certainly what we are in Pierce County. I'm sure that's where they are in St. Croix. And, if you're thinking, okay, so 98% of everything that gets charged gets settled in some other way. And that could be by a dismissal, or it could be by a plea to the charge, or some negotiated settlement. But if there's no there's obviously a huge amount of filtering going on pre-trial. And pre-charge, there's equally as much filtering going on because, frankly, there's just not no county has the capacity to do that. The question really for the prosecutor is what's in the 2%. It's not whether or not a prosecutor is going to exercise his discretion, because if a prosecutor doesn't exercise his discretion, then he hasn't got any. I mean, if you don't exercise it, you don't have it, right? Yeah. You don't need an automaton. You don't want some robot who's just processing, saying, well, do we have probable cause? You want somebody who's saying, where's the justice in this? And that's where I'm saying it's not ultimately, in large measure, always a legal question. It's a question of human decency. It's a question of fairness and justice, and what does the community want? What's in the 2% is what makes a prosecutor the prosecutor, because what's in that 2% indicates to people what that prosecutor prioritizes. So, in Pierce County, at least, where I'm practicing, where I'm working with 2 excellent other prosecutors, like what's in our 2% is crimes involving victims. We tried 14 cases last year, and that's very, very high. That's very aggressive for a district attorney's office with 1 judge. And that's, we tried 4 sex assaults, we're trying batteries, we're trying invasions of privacy, because those are the things that matter to our office. And it's not a decision that my boss makes for my cases, for the cases that I try. Those are cases that I prioritize. Those are the cases that I take to trial. Okay,
so are you saying that if it's more likely not to get a conviction, then you would charge it, or if there's just a possibility of a conviction, then you would?
So if you don't have the possibility of a conviction, then ethically you cannot charge somebody.
Sure.
But when you charge somebody, it's not a question of the probability of getting a conviction. It's what is the justice in what you're doing? Because sometimes you're like, when you go to trial, it's because it's, I'm convinced, and maybe the jury won't be, but those are the hard cases. Those are the cases that go to trial. So, firstly, it's very hard to measure I don't read a referral or a case and go, oh, well, this is a 72.987% chance of conviction. It just doesn't work like that, But what I will say is I'll look at them and say, yeah, this is a case that I ethically can charge, and I think that either this person did this, or I have a lot of sympathy for the victim, or there's no justice in charging it, or no justice in not charging it. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of those, that sort of incomputable factor.
And I didn't mean to insinuate that you have to have a specific. All I said, just generally, more likely than not, but you wouldn't even use that as a guide as to whether it's likely to get a conviction. It's just, you know, if you look at the case and it's possible and you feel like you need to stand up for this victim, even though
Sure.
it may not result in a conviction.
Or stand up for the defendant. Sometimes
Just try the case and go through the trial and everything, even though you might not get a conviction.
Or sometimes you say, well, this is a slam dunk. I got this thing 6 ways from Sunday. There's no possibility that this defendant will not be convicted. But perhaps there's no justice in it. You know, perhaps it's some high school kid who was out with a few of his buddies and, you know, was caught in senior prom night smoking pot under the 94 bridge. You're like, oh, I got the thing sewn up. But maybe that person just needs a break because, you know, he's going to college and he's got a life to lead and he doesn't need.
Well, and one of the areas in the sexual arena, a lot of times is these situations, boyfriend, girlfriend, and just the statutory age thing. And I've seen great variance in prosecutorial discretion on whether or not somebody gets charged with a felony and has that on their record for the rest of their life, or whether some tolerance is issued and, you know, listen to the victim as well. I mean, we've got the protection of victims' rights, and sometimes the victims aren't necessarily going for the conviction. So there's another concept we talked about was overcharging, and that is a set of facts are brought into you by a cop. He makes an arrest. He could make an arrest for 6 different things. Some of them stronger than others. And for the same actions, you could charge 3 different levels.
Yeah.
Theft is one example.
Sure.
You can group smaller ones to make one felony charge, or you can charge them as all small misdemeanors if you want. So do you, have you seen in your practice, and of course you can only speak for your county, but allegations where, hey, you're charged this one a little bit heavy knowing that you're going to maybe plea bargain it down to something and get a conviction to something less, but at least secure the conviction?
So I have a problem with that. I mean, I have a problem with saying, I'm going to charge this guy with all this stuff so that I can negotiate a settlement. My view absolutely is the day you charge it, the day you try it. So the day that I put my name on that complaint and say, here are the charges that are being issued, I have to be prepared to go to trial immediately on every count. I charge what I think the person did wrong, okay?
Right.
But I don't, these sort of strategic considerations are, you know, I have a real problem with sort of saying, well, I'll overcharge this so that I can negotiate it down. That I have an issue with. That's not something that I would necessarily agree with. Because it comes back to the same thing that you say, well, what's the possibility of conviction? You know, I mean, conviction rates do not make an attorney. Conviction rates indicate usually that cases are not, that there's a lot of stuff going by the board. Cases are not being prosecuted that should be prosecuted. Because conviction rates, and similarly with like overcharging, you know, overcharging is an indication that and then with this strategic renegotiation is an indication that the underlying case is probably pretty weak, you know? Whereas instead of just picking one charge, being like, here it is, and this is what I'm going to go to trial on, so the defense attorney knows you're serious. You know, my view is if you lose every case that you go to trial on, then you are trying far too many cases, okay? Because you're not picking cases that you can win. But similarly, if you win every case, it means that you're not trying hard cases. You're not trying cases because the idea with the jury trial is that you could lose. So you want to have somewhere in the middle where you're saying to the jury, here are the facts as I believe them to be. The defense attorney is obviously going to have their own view, and the jury are going to make that decision. And as long as ethically you as the prosecutor can make your peace with the case, you're not putting on a case that you don't believe in, putting on evidence that you think is probably not supported, like putting on an argument that isn't supported by the evidence as you hear it, then that's fine. It's okay for me to believe the victim and put the case on because I believe the victim, so long as I just don't think no reasonable person could ever do so. And that's where you're talking about overcharging. Like, that's exactly what that is. That's saying, well, look, this isn't supported by any of the evidence, but we'll just charge the moon here so we can renegotiate. And that's improper in my book.
Okay. There's another aspect to this job, and that is because the St. Croix office being larger than some of our neighboring counties, including Pierce County, that there's just managing of personnel and administrative and aspect to the job. What do you feel from your experience prepares you for that aspect to this job?
So there's sort of two things. I mean, one is like you're saying, well, it's larger than neighboring counties. I'm like, sure, but it's not the largest county by a long chalk. I mean, it's not like Milwaukee, right? So it's ultimately still a reasonably rural county. What prepares me for it? Managerially, I mean, I'm in charge of, like, I work collaboratively with the people that I work with in my office currently. You know, in a previous life, I was a corporate attorney, and I was in a more managerial role where I had staff to manage then, and before I became, you know, a sole practitioner and a prosecutor then in Pierce. But like my touchstone as far as managerial style goes is just giving people some safety, giving them security, letting them do their jobs. By all means, setting goals, you know, setting benchmarks, saying, hey, I want this to happen, I'd like to see this happen. But I don't micromanage. I'm not going to go into any environment and say that, you know, I'm going to oversee your work in detail for two reasons. One, because I'm like, I don't have the time for that. And I mean, I limit everybody else's ability to do their job to what I am able to oversee in, you know, during a work week. But secondly, because I'm like, I want people to feel like they can fulfill their own potential. So as long as they feel some security, like they can do their jobs, and they know that I'm not breathing down their necks, I think that's where people really maximize what they're going to do. And as long as they're setting benchmarks, I want to go from A to B. I really don't have strong feelings about how we get there. I'm not going to say it has to be done a certain way. I just want to say at the end of the year, in 12 months' time, I want to be at B or certainly nearer B than we are now.
Okay. So you don't expect to second guess, like if you delegate cases, sign the cases, let them make charging decisions, you don't expect to be second guessing that very frequently?
No, I mean, I would hope that their values in some sense, like as a policy, I mean, like, here are the values that this office is going to try to abide by. Here's the things that are going to matter to us as an office. That 2% that I'm talking about, here's what the 2% ought to be. But no, I'm not going to go in there. I don't have the time. And frankly, if you're going to delegate work to your people, you have to be able to trust your people. So
you got some sense of how much of this job you want to spend prosecuting and how much you want to spend administrating and supervising?
Well, I think I'd like to spend, I love being in a courtroom, so I would certainly want to spend some of my time in a courtroom. I think that is probably, the job is perhaps being over-administered right now. I don't know that, I think there's 7 assistant district attorneys in the current district attorney's office, but they're doing, I think, all of the workload. I'm not sure that they need perhaps as much management as they're currently getting.
Okay. You mentioned having done this prosecution thing for roughly 3 years. How many trials have you had? How many jury trials have you had in that time?
I have had, gosh, I probably tried 6 or 7 cases. It wasn't that many. I tried 3 this year. Might have been 5 last year or 6. I don't know, Jamie. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. But you have like roughly a dozen?
About a dozen, I'd say, yeah.
And then being part-time, does that afford you the ability to defend some people in other counties?
Here's one thing I'll tell you. I, as a part-time prosecutor in Pierce County, tried more cases than any of the prosecutors in St. Croix.
Okay.
And they're all full-time.
Okay. So
what was your question? Do I defend people in other counties?
Right.
I can do defense of civil forfeitures, which are like tickets, as long as the other party is not the state of Wisconsin. So like a good example would be like, and I don't do it very much because it makes me uncomfortable. I do it on occasion, almost exclusively for like friends or
so
family
like
members.
If somebody got a ticket in the city of Eau Claire, you could do that.
Yeah, and like, but like if someone came to me and said, hey, I just got your name off the internet, I want you to defend me in Eau Claire, I'd probably say no. I'd pass on a lot of that. I do it for people that I know.
Well, what I was looking at was the fact that your experience is not strictly prosecutorial.
No, I do a fair amount of civil. No, most everything else I do is civil work.
Okay, well, I was just wondering, do you have any experience like the last candidate that we interviewed has had virtually all of her experience on the defense side,
Yeah.
and knows what it's like to be charged with a crime and identify with somebody who's had that experience. So I was just wondering if you've had that opportunity.
Yeah, I did about 9 months of criminal defense work after I started my practice, and then the remainder is just civil trial work. So I'm set for trial in a civil case at the end of the year. I've had, a handful of civil bench trials. I did a family case in January. I had a 2-day trial on that.
Okay. So you have a little bit broader experience than just prosecuting cases. And of the cases that you have prosecuted in roughly a dozen jury trials, is there a percentage of felonies versus misdemeanors? Do you know? In your
Probably
case?
about half and half, I would think.
Okay. Toughest case that you've tried so far?
Toughest, like, to get a conviction or emotionally?
Just, emotionally.
There was a case start of last year that I had, I put a lot of myself into it, that was a tough case for me,
And what was the nature of the charge?
It was like a battery, child assault.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
Okay.
It was a domestic.
All right. Yeah, I mean, because those are generally it's children. I remember when I was prosecutor in Eau Claire, and my current wife, she had a young daughter who was about the same age as one of the victims in one of my sexual assault cases, and about the same age and similar, blonde hair, blue eyes, and everything. It was very tough to differentiate and to keep that case just at work.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get away from work, so to speak? What do you do to get your mind off what can be intense work?
Well, Jamie, as I see you at the YMCA regularly, and so that's one way I have to release pressure. But I mean, outside of that, really, I just try to just leave it at the office. I mean, I like to spend time with my family if I'm not there. But really, it's got to just be a mental break. I don't think that there's a physical way that you can just get away from some of what we do, because we see a fair amount of human tragedy as prosecutors. And
Right.
because in seeing that, I sometimes feel like, what else can you do except just try to get away from it,
Right.
mentally. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yep, sure. Well, with that, I think we're at the end of our time. I want to thank you for coming in and wish you well for this election. The primary is August 9th.
Right, yeah.
And then, depending on the results there, I mean, there's going to be one of 3 people coming out from the Republican side to face the sole Democratic candidate, and then a whole nother 90-day campaign starts again after that. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and thank you, the viewers, for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal.